Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to perhaps the an international closing session in this version of FICCO 2022, the Independent Comics Festival of Colombia. He is Santiago. Santiago is the person who made this possible. And of course, those of you who are participating in the comic session, those independent artists, without you, this would have never been possible. So today we're going to be talking to Renée Nault. And I mean, she will be speaking, but at the end you can ask questions if you want. She's the author of the graphic version or of the Handmaid's Tale. I don't know if you have seen the series in Paramount. It's been greatly accepted, and she created this universe from sketches and drawings, and with her main characteristics we have those very living or vivid drawings, and it is so cool to for her to be here with us. I insist you can ask questions at the end, or if you want to ask her as the conversation goes on, you can feel free. More information about Renee. She's an illustrator, graphic novelist. She's Canadian. She's the second Canadian graphic artist. Yesterday we had Sarah Levitt, and today we will welcome Renee Nault. Thank you, Vibrio Red, which make this possible. Also, the Canadian Embassy in Colombia that also provided this service, so that you could hear this session in your native language. So, in 2019, this graphic novel started. This work started. Uh, it was first by Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale, which became so famous, and then and thanks to the efforts of the fans, there were a lot of incentives to create diverse, different. She was born in Vancouver. She was moved then to Victoria. Then she was influenced by the brilliant, the shiny colors of the submarine landscape. So this is why in her artistic work, we will see a lot of water-related approaches. There's a lot of collaboration. She not only she's devoted to doing stories, but she has supported newspapers, journals, in graphic novels. So let's pass the floor to Renee so she can speak about she's going to talk about bringing it to life. Renee Nault, hello, Renee. Good afternoon. The floor is
Hello.
yours.
I'm so happy to be speaking to people all the way in Colombia. Thank you so much for having me. Um, Perfect. Thank you so much. So I was so honored to get to work on The Handmaid's Tale with Margaret Atwood, who is a Canadian legend of literature. And yeah, this is such an important book right now. As we know, all around the world, women's rights are being challenged. And even though this book was written in 1985, it still feels very relevant today, unfortunately. So I'm going to be walking you through the process that I took to turn a novel into a comic book. To start with, this book has become a phenomenon all over the world. The original novel was published in 1985, and it's since been published in almost every language in the world. These are some of the covers from the different versions from different countries. And it's also been adapted into different mediums, such as a very successful show on HBO, an opera, a ballet, and a feature film. So it's really been adapted into a lot of mediums, but this is the first time that it had become a comic book. This is a photo of the book release in the UK at Waterstones Books. And these are some of the lovely people that I've met at different comic conventions around the world, cosplaying The Handmaid. So yeah, this was quite a journey. The book took me 3 years to complete. It's 250 pages, all painted in watercolor. So my background is as an illustrator. I've done posters for music festivals, illustrations for magazines and newspapers, fashion, advertising. So I was approaching comics as an illustrator, first of all. My work is really influenced by Asian art, specifically Japanese woodblock prints, and also by French comic books. So those are sort of two very different things that I like, that I try to bring together in my art. These are some of my images for the Los Angeles Times newspaper. I was doing book review illustrations, which is how Margaret Atwood first saw my work. As you can see, I work mostly in watercolor and ink. So I like to use the hard lines of ink to sort of give some foundation to very loose and floaty watercolor paint. And here you can really see some of the Asian influence in my work, the Japanese woodblock prints really coming through. Tintin, the very first comic book I read was Tintin in French school. So these like Franco-Belgian comics have a lot of space in my heart. And this was an illustration for Margaret Atwood's book, The Year of the Flood, the first book in the Oryx and Crake series, I think. So this is the very first illustration of mine that she saw. And she said that right away she was interested in having me illustrate The Handmaid's Tale. This is some of my early comic book work where I'm trying to use text in interesting ways, trying to use it in unconventional spaces. And some more comic book work that I've done. This was a horror comic based here in British Columbia. So I was trying to use the ocean and the nature of Canada to become a horror story. The very first comic book that I made on my own was this book, Witchling. It was very influenced by French comics, and I wanted to do the entire thing in watercolor with as much detail as I could. So as you can see, I put so much time into every panel, and you really can't do this sort of level of detail in comics for very long. Like, we don't have enough time. But I really enjoy doing this. I think that in Europe, they have a lot more time to make comics. Like here in North America, we have to make them really fast. Like the classic example is Marvel and DC Comics. You know, you have to come out with an issue every month. And there just isn't time to do these like really detailed, beautiful pictures. I wish there was. So when I was first approached to illustrate the Handmaid's Tale comic, they sent me the novel, which is, of course, a classic. and basically just said, we want to see your interpretation of this world. Basically, I wasn't given any firm guidance. They just wanted to see what I would come up with. So this was the very first image that I drew based on the book. This shows the handmaids at the wall where people are executed in the world of Gilead. And I thought it was really important to design the costumes accurately, because in the book, the color-coded uniforms that people wear are sort of the most iconic image in the world of Gilead. So the handmaid's costume is described as having all these layers. It just felt so heavy and all skin has to be covered up. Women have to be incredibly hidden and modest. So she starts with this like just little underwear, and then a shift, and then a dress over top, and then an overdress over top of that to hide everything, and then a cape and hat. These were some early images of the main wife character, Serena Joy, who is like the matriarch of the story. I wanted the wife costumes to be very austere, but also have these ornamental veils, sort of a way for the wives to show off their wealth to each other. And this is a picture of one of the daughters. There's a marriage scene in the book, and I wanted these daughters to look like walking wedding cakes. This is a design for the soldiers. It talks about them fighting in toxic environments. So I decided they should have like a gas mask and goggles and be all covered up in a very scary way. And these are the soldiers. I also liked designing these little icons. You can see the eyes and the swords and the wings. Every group has their own different insignia. These are sort of the more everyday servants. They work in the household and they do menial tasks. So I wanted their uniform to look a little bit more like a chauffeur or like a, you know, a bellhop or something. And these were some of the early character designs for the commander, who is the main guy, the most powerful man in the story. So I really wanted him to look powerful, but also, you know, a little bit corrupt and horrible. And these are the ants. They are sort of enforcers among the women. They sort of take on this domineering role where they make sure that everybody obeys all the rules. So I wanted their uniform to be very military and very strong and buttoned up. This is definitely the most fun part of the process for me, getting to design all these costumes. And because at this point, you know, there's no rules, it's just your imagination. And later on, you have to settle down and like decide what you want to do. But at this point, you can just draw whatever you want. So here we have the handmaids have to have these passports to get through different checkpoints. So I designed a little passport with some stamps and also this little pat of butter, because butter is sort of used in the story. The women are not allowed to use makeup or skincare products. So they secretly take butter and put it on their faces. This uniform is sort of like an alternate one. There's a lot of the book takes place in sort of a training center or like a re-education center. So I designed this outfit sort of based on concentration camp uniforms of the past. I wanted it to be very almost humiliating to wear. And it also serves a second function where the viewer can tell when they're looking at scenes that take place in the past because they can see this different outfit. These women are called econo wives. They're sort of the wives of the poor men. And so they don't have enough money to have a full dress. So they take pieces from all the other dresses and sew them together to make their own. And these were sort of like the most fun outfits to design because, you know, I based them a little bit on folk costumes of different countries and just had a lot of fun with it. Although in the end, I think that these are a little bit too beautiful. They look very fashionable and they maybe shouldn't for this situation. And this is Moira, who's probably my favorite character. She's like the tough one. So I gave her like a very kind of punk appearance. These are holy rulers. They're sort of like prayer machines. So I designed this to look a little bit like an old typewriter. It was a lot of fun to design, but I really wish I hadn't made it so complicated to draw because I had to draw a lot of these and I got very, very tired of it. So after all the designs were done, what I did was make, it's sort of like the entire book, but drawn very, very rough. So it was basically the whole story done in very tiny sketches. These pages that you're looking at are actually in real life only a few inches tall. So in that way, I could see how the entire story would look, especially with the different colors and how the different scenes would transition between different color palettes. So this isn't really how people work usually. It's kind of an odd process, but for me, it really helps to have all of the pages laid out in front of me with their colors, because color is so important to this story. And there's something about these little tiny sketches that I think is so nice. Like, I don't know, the finished work is, of course, like much more beautiful and much more detailed, but there's a certain liveliness to these tiny sketches that I really love and I sort of miss in the final work. As you can see, I was spending a lot of time thinking about design of the pages. And this is, again, the very first image that I drew of the book showing up again in the pages. So when that was done, and because this is such a famous book in Canada, there was a huge process for getting each page approved. So I would have to submit a sketch, and the sketch would have to be shown to the author, Margaret Atwood, and to the editorial team at Penguin Random House, my publisher, and also to like another board of people that I guess were just like the bosses at Penguin Random House. So there were so many layers of approval, and at each one, you know, somebody could always say, oh no, we need to change this one detail. So it was definitely a lot more of a process than I'm used to. I'm used to like working on my own and just, no, there's no spontaneity. So these are the pencils. The second stage of the book, I guess. I went through the whole thing and drew the pencil sketches. As you can see all the perspective lines on here and how much work it was to do that. To me, this is the least fun part of the process because all the spontaneity is gone and you're just trying to figure out the perspective grids and the lines, and everything is like very stiff. And these are the machines that I wish I had made more simple. Here you can see the penciled page next to the painted page. So yeah, I had to put in all these perspective lines and, figure out where everything was going to go. But then hopefully in the painted page, it looks a little bit more loose and spontaneous again. I really liked drawing all these tiles. There's something about tiles that I really love. So this is the very first page of the book. It's actually 2 pages. When you first open it up, you see this image of the concentration camp training center where all the women are in their individual beds and the ants are patrolling, basically making sure everybody's following the rules. And it's very striking. I don't know, when I see something like this, I start thinking about how easily it could come true in our society right now. I use this archway motif several times in the book to try and show the passage of time, because here you can see it's springtime early in the book and the trees are pink with cherry blossoms. But then later you can see it's summer and the trees are all green. And then we see it once more at the end of the book and the trees are orange, fall has come. And it's a pretty subtle detail, but I think that people will at least maybe subconsciously understand that like a season has passed. So this is the checkpoint. A little bit about the book, if you haven't read it. Basically, in the future, in the United States of America, a religious far-right group has seized control of the government, and they have instituted this rigid system where everybody has a role to play in service of the state. People are sort of color-coded according to their roles, and women, because there's a fertility crisis and very few women can have children, certain fertile women are designated as the childbearers, and those are the handmaids in red. The wives of the commanders wear blue. The domestic help, who are called the Marthas, wear green. And then, of course, all men are either commanders or servants or soldiers. So this system, which is very bad for women, is of course also bad for men because they have no opportunity to do what they want. They just have to die in service of this government. As they go through the gate, she has to have her passport stamped. Every time they go into town, they have to be recorded and pass these little checkpoints. It's pretty awful, and I don't know, it just seems like maybe things are going that way now. So here they are in the old city, and this starts to show a technique that I used. When Offred, the main character, is thinking about her past, I use a different color palette and a different watercolor technique. So basically, when we're in the present, in the world of Gilead, everything has this dark black line around it. I used ink really sharply. But when we are looking at the past, there's no ink line. This picture in the middle with the 2 people drinking coffee, you can see it just has a pencil outline. So I was trying to make it look softer, like a bit like an old memory, an old film. It also has a warmer color palette. So in the world of Gilead, I used very bright primary colors like red, blue, green, the colors of the uniforms. But in the time before, in her memories, I tried to use yellow and pink and brown, like colors that are warmer and sort of more friendly. Here's a picture of all the different types of women. You've got the handmaids in red, the Marthas, the domestic servants, are in green, the Econo wives with their striped uniforms, and then there's also a widow. There's a lot of widows in this world because the wars that the men fight are just taking them away by the droves. Now, the women in Gilead are not permitted to read. So because they can't read, all the signs have to be pictures. And yeah, I had a lot of fun designing these things. In the book, they talk about the different, the meat sign for the butcher, and then there's the cow, bee, and eggs for the honey, milk, and eggs. And of course, since the task of the handmaids is to bear children, if one of them gets pregnant, it's a huge deal and all the other women are envious. So I tried to design this page all based around the circle shape of the pregnant woman as all the other women look at her in envy. On this page, the handmaids see a group of tourists. They're supposed to be Japanese tourists, and they're just shocked by the colors of their outfits and how much skin they show. They can't imagine anymore what it was like to dress like that. So I had a lot of fun using bright colors in this scene and trying to use, again, the colors of the time before, the yellow, the pink, the purple, just all the colors of the rainbow instead of just red, green, blue. And here you can see the handmaids are walking towards the wall. And then as we turn the page, it's this big double page spread of the wall where people are executed. And this is very much like the very first picture that I drew for this whole book. Just, I guess that was the main image that stuck in my head. So here, Offred is thinking about the time before and her memories of her old life. And I really tried to use the yellow and the softness of the nostalgia of the color palette. So again, pink, yellow, soft lines. It has this very strong contrast with the hard lines of her hair, the hard ink lines. And here she gets to see a fashion magazine from the time before Gilead. And I wanted it to be so bright and exciting to her because, she gets to remember the past as it was. So I actually had the fashion illustrations jumping off of the page and like becoming a whole world that she can remember. This is probably one of the most fun pages to draw. So here she is in her bed at night, just sort of thinking about her failure to get pregnant and how that might lead to her death. So it's a very dark moment in the book. And actually, this is the page that Margaret Atwood chose to take for herself. Like I had all these pages laid out for an art gallery show and said, Margaret, you can pick whichever one you want, of course. And she chose this one, which is probably like one of the darker pages in the book. But I guess she just liked it and spoke to her. It has the very bright red that is the iconic color of the book. I spent a lot of time trying to decide what kind of red I would want, and I settled on vermilion, very specific vermilion that I bought in Japan that is almost, it has undertones of orange. So to me, it seems like a really a violent but also beautiful, lifelike color. So in this scene, Offred and her husband and their child are trying to escaping from the United States to Canada, and they don't succeed. But because this is when they get caught and incarcerated, this is sort of the turning point from the old life into the present time of Gilead. So this is the moment when the soft color palette and the soft lines meet the hard lines of the future. So it was very interesting. You can see in this page, it starts off very soft, and then suddenly the soldiers show up and they're outlined in the hard black ink. And then here is where everything starts to switch to the hard black ink. And this was a very interesting scene. I wanted it to be really scary and emotional. So I started it out with very controlled ink lines, but then as the scene goes on, the lines become more and more rough and emotional. So basically, I started out using a normal pen, like a quill pen. And as I went on, I started to use a brush. And then here, I started to use a brush that I had sort of destroyed. I took a brush and I cut it up with scissors, and I made it as rough as I could so that the lines would be really thick and scratchy and ugly. So all of this is done with that brush. And then as it went on even further, I got rid of that brush and I actually started using a stick. It was just a stick that I found in my backyard, and I cut it down a little bit so it would be sharp. And yeah, it made these really rough, scary lines that I think really show the main character's emotion in this scene. Yeah, so here I'm using just the stick to draw all these lines. And then as the memory fades away, we go back to these quiet lines of just the pen. So in this scene, Offred gets to go to this sort of illegal nightclub, because even though the world of Gilead is so conservative and Christian, they still have these secret nightclubs for the powerful men, because of course, you know, the hypocrisy of this world is that it's not really modest and virtuous. It's just imposing those rules onto the lower classes. So I wanted this scene to look like an old like film noir movie, like from the 1940s, a little bit black and white and with lots of dark shadows. And then as she walks into the nightclub, the color palette changes to this kind of yellowy green. And the idea was I wanted it to look like the old time, the time before Gilead, but to be a little bit sick and a little bit gross. So it's almost like trying to be like the old times, but it's awful. And in this page, we see the full nightclub and just what's available to these people at the very top of the social order, the powerful men. This page has given me a little bit of trouble because the book is being translated into many languages and released in different countries. And it seems different countries have different ideas about what's okay to show in a comic. They've gone into my art and drawn like a bra over top of the woman's chest, and it looks very stupid. And there, in the very, very far background, you can see a nude woman in the fountain, and they've drawn a bra over her, even though it's really just a dot. Like, you're just seeing a dot. It's not very titillating. I don't know. It was really fun to get to draw all these outfits. In the book, of course, being such a conservative religious society, they don't make like sexy outfits anymore. So all of these sexy clothes are scavenged from the time before. There's swimsuits, there's exercise outfits, a cheerleader's outfit, Halloween costumes. It's just really funny to think about, like, what kind of stuff would they be able to find to fill this sexy clothes shortage. And then we see Moira, Offred's friend from the time before, but she's completely transformed. She's had to work in this club, so she's become this, she's wearing a sexy Playboy bunny outfit that just doesn't suit her at all. And Offred sneaks away to meet her in the bathroom, the only place where they can actually talk. And I used this pinky color for the bathroom because I wanted it to be like this nice, sweet moment where they actually get to be together again. And I had a lot of fun drawing this wallpaper. I really like drawing wallpaper. Moira is definitely my favorite character to draw. She's got such a cool look. And I think that she's probably everybody's favorite because she's the only one who actually seems to, like, stand up against this world and this regime, even though it doesn't do her any favors in the long run. This is Moira telling her story of how she came to be working in this club. And so for this, I wanted to have like a totally different look from the rest of the pages. So I did the whole thing in black and white India ink, but I used all kinds of different textural mediums. I threw in some salt into the ink to make these sort of halos appear. I used some sand and some dish soap, like dish soap that goes into your dishwasher. I just threw that into the ink and it made these really cool sort of blooms in the water. The end effect is that it looks really grimy and decomposed. So it has kind of a scary look that I like. And here she's talking about a video that she saw of what's happening outside of the world of Gilead, out in the bigger country. And it's so horrific. Basically, there's terrible wars that don't end. There's corpses everywhere. It was not very fun to draw these pages, but I did enjoy getting to use that textural ink and trying to make them look as grimy and scratchy as possible. In the final panel here, you can really see how the dish soap bled into the ink and made these really awesome flower shapes. So this is the last scene in the book, and it shows the handmaids attending this event where there's going to be a public execution. So they file into this college, and it's such a horrible irony that this is happening at a college. You know, a university, a center of higher learning has now been transformed into just a public execution ground. So they all sit down and there's this rope, and this symbolism is that as the people are hung by nooses, everybody touches the rope to signify that they agree with this punishment. So it's sort of a way to make everybody complicit in this horrible act. This is Aunt Lydia, the worst woman in the book, probably. And I had a lot of fun making her very ugly and scary. Although in the second book, The Testaments, the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale that Margaret just wrote, Aunt Lydia sort of becomes a bit more sympathetic. This is the only page where I used a 9-panel grid. I wanted the execution to seem almost boring, so I didn't want to have any like exciting layouts or, you know, I wanted this to seem very emotionless because it's so ordinary to them now. And that's like the real horror of the story, is like all these horrible things that are happening, people are just used to it. You know, it doesn't even seem horrible anymore because you see it every day. So after the hanging, this man is brought out and thrown in front of the handmaids. And they say, you know, this man is a criminal, he's a rapist, and he killed a pregnant woman. And of course, to the handmaids, that's the worst thing that they could ever hear. That's the worst crime you could commit, although it turns out not to be true. But the idea is that the government is giving this prisoner to the handmaids to tear apart so that they can release their frustrations, so that they'll be obedient towards the government. It's kind of just a horrible way of letting them let off steam when, this man actually turns out to be innocent. So since this is like the most scary and violent scene of the book, I drew it very rough. I actually used the stick again that I was using before to draw these handmaids coming down from the corner. And one handmaid of Glenn, who turns out to be a revolutionary, she rushes forward to basically kick the man in the head so that he'll be unconscious for the rest of this process. It's a kind of a mercy killing. So yeah, she just kicks him in the head and stomps him, and that's the end of him, so he doesn't have to suffer through the rest of this. And here they're just tearing him to pieces. And I used the stick to draw the lines, and I used like a huge paintbrush, the biggest paintbrush I could find, soaked it in red paint, and then just threw the paint at the page. So I was getting these splatters going everywhere. And I think it turned out really well to have that look of just blood and gore. And in the aftermath, they're dragging the handmaids away, and they're sort of realizing what they've done, and it's just this horrible moment. And this Janine from earlier in the book is just soaked in blood, and you can tell she's completely crazy now. Like, that's sort of like one way to cope with this society, is just completely lose your mind. So here, Fred is seeing her friend of Glenn, but it's a different woman. A different woman has appeared and said, "Oh, it's me, of Glenn." So she's like, what do you mean? What happened to the old one? And she's just gone. Like, people can be replaced and nobody ever talks about it. So they go over to the wall and see these women hanging up. And this is where the protagonist of Fred starts to think about, well, this could happen to me if I don't do exactly what people say, if I get out of line, this could happen to me. And it's just this horrible moment where she's thinking, like, this is it. This is how things are now. And it's all hitting her. And so I used these dead flowers in the background, made them look like hanging handmaids. This is an interesting thing that you can do in comic books that you can't do in film or in pretty much any other medium, is switch between the literal and the surreal. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, if you did this scene in a movie with these hanging flowers, it would look a little bit weird and it would take people out of the story. but in comics, it seems very natural. So she starts thinking about ending her life, hanging herself before she can be taken away by the government and basically tortured. This page is sort of beautiful, ironically beautiful. And I kind of like to use beautiful imagery whenever something horrible is happening. I don't know, I think that the contrast of what's happening and the beauty makes people think about it more. But she's thinking about ending her life a little bit too late because the government is here in their black van with a white eye, and a soldier starts coming up the stairs. But luckily, he whispers to her that he's here to help her. She just has to come with him, and he's with the revolution, and he's going to get her away to safety. But she doesn't know if she can believe him. So basically, the last scene is her following him down the stairs, coming to the van, stepping up, and she doesn't know if she's going to her death or if she's going to be saved and taken away to safety. So it's this very mysterious moment. We don't know what's going to happen. So I just have her step off the page, and that is how the book ends. So I hope you guys enjoyed the images, and I hope you have some questions by now about the process. Can we open it up to questions?
Do you have any questions about the? Do you have any questions about the Handmaid's Tale?
Great.
I wanted to know, when you take the book from zero, from scratch, and when you read the whole book, as you take the story, do you write down the characteristics, or or do you read it all at once and then you develop? What's the process? How do you follow the process of the scenes, or I mean, the future, the past life? Do you take notes in terms how is it that you want to reflect that, or how do you or how you feel it at the time? What's your creative moment to go from the book to the physical to the work you do?
Great question. So when I first read this book actually back in high school. In Canada, we read it as part of our high school curriculum. So I had read the book already, but when I was tasked with doing the book, I basically read and a highlighter, and I would circle different passages that I thought were really important and cross out some things that I thought we could take away. So it was just a very long process of reading it over and over, and mostly taking things away because, of course, the book is much longer than the comic. So I would sort of circle especially nice passages because Margaret's work is so beautiful. Her words are gorgeous. So it was so hard to take them away. But eventually I sort of whittled it down, slowly taking things away, until finally I had what I thought was the core of the book. So yeah, I guess the answer is reading it many times, highlighting, and then just whittling it down. Does that make sense? Good.
I wanted to ask you, what led you to to create this type of comic, and what led you to create this book?
Like The Handmaid's Tale in particularly, or comics in general?
The Handmaid's Tale.
Well, to me, this is such an important book because, well, for one thing, in Canada, this is a classic book. This is like probably the most famous book that's ever come out of Canada. So I was really excited to work on it for that reason. But also, this is so relevant right now. I mean, women's rights around the world are sort of degrading, and governments are grabbing power. The right-wing political movement is sort of gaining steam in every country, not just the United States. So it just seemed very relevant to me for right now. And I hope that people, with any dystopian literature, the hope is that people will read it and think like, this is how things could be if we don't stop it. So yeah, I hope that it will be sort of like a warning sign for people.
Hi, Renee. My question is more focused on. I was curious about the adaptation you made of this comic, and there are no texts in there, so you can only see, I mean, the drawings, the sketches, and and uh, and and we normally include some gestures or onomatopoeias,
Mhm.
and I see that you didn't use them, so I see that you used more body language, and it is too curious for me because you're a woman, and part of the story, and the main character of the story is a woman. So I would like to know, what was the process for you to adapt, and how do you reflect this art? So that was my
Mm.
question.
So the question is sort of about the text and the lack of onomatopoeic sounds in the art. I think um, so. The okay, the book was sort of unusual because the publisher, Penguin Random House, wanted to release this in many countries, so I couldn't use any um, not just English text, but even letters, like English letters, because it was going to be translated into every language. So, if I had written bang or something in the art, then it wouldn't make sense when it was translated into Japanese and Korean because they use different letters. So, yeah, even though I would have liked to use some letters as design elements, it wasn't possible because all of that had to be added digitally later on. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about the world of Gilead is it's not just bad for women, it's bad for everybody except for the men at the very, very top of the pyramid. So if you read the novel, you find that LGBT people are persecuted, of course. People of color are persecuted. So basically, like racism, sexism, homophobia, it's all there. And yeah, so I definitely felt very strongly about the story. And it's hard to think about, you know, if that happened here, what would happen to me and what would happen to my friends. It's very scary.
Any additional questions? I'd like to know, when you were doing the scenes and when you were breaking the brushes, or when you were in the sticks, I mean, from your backyard and things, when you were using these type of materials, how did you get to do that? I mean, did you say, did you think that it was going, did you, or did you, it was a trial, a test and trial error, or I want to see these? What was the process for you to get to use this type of non-conventional materials, to call them that way?
I got to try a lot of different materials that way. So of course I would do a test because I wanted to make sure it would have the right kind of rough line. So, you know, I tried a bunch of different sticks, a bunch of different brushes. I tried even inking with my finger a little bit, but it turned out it didn't work that well. But it's all about just experimenting. You know, like if you have time, it's really fun to just find like different objects and see what kind of mark they will make on the page. And, you know, like with the ink textures that I was making, you know, trying different things like sand and salt and putting it in the ink to see what will happen. And basically, you can use these materials in so many different ways. You just have to try different things. So yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that kind of thing. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. There's not obviously very many stories where you would have an opportunity to to draw so roughly, but I think for those few scenes it was really fun and it worked.
Thank you for being here with us. And please don't miss the rest of the activities. Hopefully, next time we can have you here in Colombia in person, Renee, and enjoy the rest of the day in this 11th version of the Colombian Festival.
Thank you.